Hi everyone, it's Maddie Brady. We're here to get real about mental health. Stay tuned for some great conversations with some very special guests. Hi everyone, welcome to Get Real. We are here with Jillian, who just celebrated her 2 years of sobriety.
I did. It's very exciting.
Congratulations, that is huge.
Thank you. It was a long time coming. So it was very emotional and monumentous. And it was a really fantastic milestone that I'm really proud of.
Yeah, you absolutely should be. Especially, I feel like the first year and second year are the hardest. Those are the worst. So
the first year is really like, I don't want to use the term white knuckling. I will use the term like you are trying to survive, right? You are trying to find who you are as your like authentic self.
Yeah.
And that is across like friends, family, boundaries, hobbies. And you're really just like, okay, how do I come out of this and really try to manage coping with life in general without the drugs and the alcohol. So yeah, and I think the second year was really about executing those things, and life really started to become so joyous and healthy, and it really started to improve my second year. I mean, it started to improve day one, but it's cool to see that transformation and that transition.
Yeah, that's great, especially that it got better going into the second year. But I think that's something that I always try to highlight, because in the beginning of sobriety, it can be so confusing because you think it's just going to be instantly better, especially when there's a lot of people like myself trying to glorify the good parts of sobriety, but then there's a lot of really tough, really challenging hurdles that you have to get over throughout the entire course of sobriety, but that are really prevalent in that first year.
I couldn't agree with you more. I know, when you first get sober, there's some mess, right? Yeah. And you need to actively work to clean that up. And I know, the first 30 days, I know, at least from my story, there's so much physical sickness, right? There's, the sweats, the shakes, the nausea, that you are just laser focused on just not picking up that first drink. And that can go for a couple of months. And then once your mind starts to clear up and all that stuff is out of your system, it's like, okay, now what do I need to do to heal across all aspects of your life? So I think people think about that pink cloud, right? That, okay, sobriety is going to solve all my problems, but, not drinking and not using drugs is really just that first step. And then the work really comes in.
Absolutely. And I know for myself, I've said, like, I felt like once I got sober, then it was time to tackle this issue, then that issue. And it was just one at a time, and then it's still going, but now I got the large ones out of the way, and now it's like, okay, you have to work on setting boundaries, still need to work on your people pleasing, the smaller ones. But in the beginning, we were talking about beforehand that we both have struggled with an array of different things too.
Yes.
So those all, for me at least, had to be tackled right at the beginning. Yes. Especially for me, my eating disorder, it went hand in hand. I was trying to get better at both at the same time, which was super challenging. And I know you had said you had an experience like that as well.
Yeah, and I was so happy to hear, not happy to hear, but knowing that, you and I can have a conversation about this. But, dealing with multiple things at once across addiction and mental health can be so overwhelming, right? And I think our healthcare system is set up that we need to tackle everything at once, or we all need to solve it together. And really, you have to go with the thing, at least in my experience, what is going to kill you first, right? So in my experience, that was drugs and alcohol. And, going back, I went to my first rehab at 22 years old, and I was just out of college, living with my parents, as you do. And my mom, set very clear boundaries right away, saying, you cannot live in my house if you are using. And that led to her dropping me off at hospitals and dropping me off at crisis centers and dropping me off at detox and rehabs. And I'll never forget, going into rehab, and I was about 3 weeks in and they asked me what my exit plan was. And my plan was to go to sober housing. And they were like, well, on your intake form, they said you're dealing with an eating disorder, which means you cannot attend sober housing. Mm-hmm. And that really killed me. And I think it killed my mom, because my exit plan was really limited to, I have to go home. Mm-hmm. And 30 days in rehab is nowhere near enough. It wasn't enough for me, and it's not enough for a lot of people. But, my eating disorder started about the same time as my drugs and alcohol addiction. And trying to solve all that at once it's a lot. It's a lot to ask of anybody.
Mm-hmm. How do you feel like you got into it? Do you remember initial thoughts or bad times that you ran into that you started to spiral with those things? Or did you just start a diet and kept going? What did that look like?
I think at the end of the day, it all goes back. Doesn't matter what it is. It's all a matter of me controlling my emotions, controlling what I look like, controlling my body, controlling other people at the end of the day, right? I need to have that control. Or as I get more and more into recovery, is trying to let that go a little bit and realizing I don't control anything. Mm-hmm. There's very little that I control in this world, and the things that I do, I still need to be monitored a little bit and have check-ins. But yeah, I think that, with drinking, it was love at first sight. It was infatuation. And that hit me so hard so quickly that, by the age of 14 when I started, and by the time I got into college, friends and family were already saying, Jillian, like, this is not normal. Mm-hmm. Even in college, it was just, I was already identified as having a problem. And with drinking came weight gain. And I played soccer for my university, and I remember my coaches commenting on my weight. I remember partners commenting on my weight. And again, a quick fix for me is always going to be my first call to action. So it was really simple for me to look at food in a way of, okay, like, we can binge and purge, and that's an easy win. Mm-hmm. We can drink and drug and feel immediately better. So anything that was going to be a quick fix and give me instant gratification was the way that I was going to go.
Mm. So you got right into your eating disorder with binging and purging.
That was, I guess, my first, and that's kind of transformed over the years, and it's still mm-hmm. something that I struggle with. But binging and purging was definitely the first go at it, if you will.
Do you feel like you struggled with any others over the course of the years, or that it led to others at all?
Other addictions or
other eating disorders?
So there was a time, I would say in my early to mid 20s, when I first got out of rehab. And again, it's just the way that we talk to each other, right? So when I got out of rehab and I stopped drinking, there are immediate signs, right? So drinking will call what I call cankle neck, no jawline, just the continuous bloating, mm-hmm. the discoloration. It's just not something that aids in what, I would say just the tall tale signs of drinking, right? Mm-hmm. There are immediate signs. And when I left rehab, I had lost a little bit of weight, and people were complimenting me. Mm. And nowadays we tell people not to comment on people's weight because you don't know what they're going through or why they're losing that weight.
Yeah.
So as I was getting more compliments, I was like, I can take this up a notch, mm-hmm. right? And I became so obsessive with exercise and limiting my food that anorexia came into play at that point. Yeah. And again, the compliments continued to come. And I look back at pictures of myself now at that time, but it got to a point where people were like, you're too thin now. Yeah. And then I felt like I couldn't win. Yeah. There was no winning in that. Mm-hmm. I don't know, how did your experience start with that?
So mine was flipped, but I feel like I ran through every single eating disorder you
Yes.
could have.
Yeah.
And mine started with anorexia and extreme restricting and extreme overexercising. And mine was very similar. You start to hear the comments, you start to get attention.
Yep.
Some might not even be meant as completely positive, but people will just say, oh, you look so much tinier, you look thinner, you look skinny, and that. And then it's like fueling the fire in your brain.
100%.
So then I went through the same thing where then I got, and mine actually started, I had put on about 10 pounds right before a cross country season. So I knew I had to get it off, and I never in my life had to lose weight at all, let alone lose weight urgently. I so thought. And then I knew how. So then that's when I kept going, and people were making those comments, and then it crossed over where I kept hearing people talking about me being too thin, whether directly telling me or I was a senior in high school at the time. So you hear people saying stuff that other people said, and someone said, oh, this person was saying this person was saying that. And I felt the same way. Well, now I'm too thin, so you really can't win.
Right.
And at that point, I then just didn't care anymore.
Right.
Like, I felt like now I like the way I look, which was entirely not true, because I was never satisfied. Even at being completely emaciated and very small, I still was not satisfied. I would still look in the mirror and say, I can't wear this dress until I'm 1 pound lighter.
Yep.
So really, I didn't like the way I looked at any point, but I knew that I didn't want to put on weight. And at the end of the day, it was completely related to control, because I remember being at one point just really having a breakdown and knowing in that moment, I cannot put on a pound or I will feel like I want to hurt myself, essentially.
Yes.
And I cannot stop doing this. Like,
Right.
there was just no direction I could go, and I just felt trapped. And then eventually, once that became unsustainable, then that led to bulimia when I was still very, very tiny, because the first time I ever messed up, because you are so controlled,
Yes.
then that led to bulimia. And then I got into, at the very end, it was binge eating and bulimia, and that was when it really got dark, because it felt like, at least in my head, I felt like at least I had some level of control and some level of having it together when I was restricting and then going out and drinking. But at this point, I was using drugs sometimes, drinking sometimes, throwing up sometimes, binging sometimes, restricting sometimes. Like, it was all over the board and just so out of control and so unmanageable that's when I eventually did get help.
And it's so exhausting.
Mm-hmm.
It is so exhausting, and it is so isolating, right?
Yeah.
So whether it's drugs, alcohol, eating disorders, everything is very secretive and everything is very closeted.
Yes. And
it's something that I've really struggled with, to allow people in and to communicate, this is what I'm dealing with and this is where I'm struggling, because I don't want to be seen as weak or vulnerable. But I mean, the eating disorder is so isolating. But I mean, I remember, even going back to college when I was battling both, at that point, my drinking was so out of control. My teammates and my housemates at the time held an intervention, and I was basically walking into a living room with 20 girls and my soccer coach, who were saying, you need to go to AA, you probably need to leave this house, you probably need to leave college and get some help, which automatically made me isolate in my room. I did leave. I left my university. I left the house. I went to study abroad in London, which is probably not the best move for somebody dealing with addiction. But that really started my approach to I don't want to hurt anybody with any of my struggles, so I'm going to take it all on. Right? You don't need to see it. You don't need to hear about it. I'm not going to tell you about it. So for the next 15 years of my life, I've kept things away from people across anything because I wanted to protect them, and I thought I was. And to do that, I needed to punish and hurt myself.
You wanted to protect the people or protect the habits you were keeping secret?
I think as my life progressed, everything really solidified that I wanted to protect them, which may sound like an excuse. But I very vividly remember my mom bringing me to a hospital because I was unconscious. And we drove, I think, like an hour and a half to a hospital in the Hamptons in New York to go through detox. And as I was laying on the bathroom floor, vomiting and being sick and cold and sweating, the nurse looked at me and said, "Do you understand what you're doing to your mother?" And I have internalized that. And I think leading to like my first 100 attempts at sobriety, that was playing in my head is I don't want to do this. I don't want to make anybody feel frustrated, angry, sad, overwhelmed, scared. And so my whole life, I've really tried to, if I am struggling, I don't want to put that on anybody else, and I'll take that on.
No, I completely relate. And especially with the eating disorders mixed with addiction, the secretiveness was rampant in my life, where I just knew that what I was doing once I got to a point was not healthy. But in my head, I justified it as other girls can be thin or be fast at running or whatever I was trying to accomplish in an easier manner.
Yes.
I wasn't dealt that hand, so this is my way to get it, and like I'm just going to be tough and get it this way. So I knew that what I was doing was unhealthy once I got to a certain point, but I just thought that was the path I had to take. And it was this demented, twisted mindset where that I thought I had to do that. And I was doing this like sick, honorable thing by getting myself there a harder route than others. But then it's so funny because as you get older, you realize some of the people that you thought just were naturally gifted or naturally built a certain way were dealing with issues of their own as well. Not all the time, but a large majority of the time. But yeah, everything. And it really became so unhealthy having these addictions and this mindset that the secretiveness, I mean, anything in your life that you're keeping a secret is probably not serving you and probably extremely unhealthy.
No. And with that comes the lying, the amount of lies that I would tell people on a, like, if somebody said, you know, how did you lose weight or how did you do this? You have to lie. Yeah. And then, you know, hide your lifestyle, right? I've never been good with nutrition. I've always over-exercised, and it just starts that whole cycle. And again, trying to live a sober lifestyle is looking at, okay, who am I lying to or manipulating? And it's exhausting. And then you forget what you've told people. The amount of times I'm like, who did I tell what? What diet have I told them I'm on, or what exercise regimen? And it doesn't help anybody. And it was just it's so painful. It is so painful.
Yeah, no, completely. And I would feel such guilt over that too, because I didn't lie about other things in life. Like that's just something I never really did. But then when it came to keeping these particular secrets secret, you had to lie because people would say, oh, do you want to grab dinner? I'd be like, oh, I just got dinner 5 minutes ago. Or just always having to make these excuses, and it starts to grow and kind of weigh you down, knowing that, because that in itself feels isolating.
Yes.
That made me feel like I wasn't like anyone else, that I had to stay in this bubble and protect all these secrets of mine so that I couldn't formulate proper relationships or friendships or anything of the sort with people, because my primary focus was protecting these extremely toxic habits and only focusing on that. And then came everything else. So I never properly could formulate relationships or anything of the sort the way I can today.
No, and it's interesting that you brought up like you feeling like unique, right? Like why can they do this and I can't? Why are they able to have these things and I can't? And I think that for years, you know, I've used that as like, I'm super unique. My eating disorder is harder. It's more badass. My addiction is way bigger than yours, which just keeps people sick, right?
Yes.
And again, none of us are unique in that sense. And I think that's what makes people so interesting. It doesn't matter if you're dealing with addiction or eating disorder or codependency or issues with men, sex. Walking down the streets of New York City, anybody that you come across, anybody, you know, that you pass as you're walking down is struggling with something. And I think just understanding that we're also multifaceted, and mental health and addiction is so multifaceted that, you know, especially getting into recovery, that has to be as well, right? You can't just do one thing. And like, as you say, taking the approach of like, okay, I'm going to work on this and then that, and then boundaries, and then hard conversations. It's all encompassing.
So you brought up the relationships with men and struggling with that. Can you tell me a little bit about how you feel like your addictions played into that?
Of course. I think, you know, seeking instant gratification is always the thing that I look for. And I know trying to get sober in your early to mid 20s, and even now, you go on a date and it's a first date and you tell them you're in recovery, and they decide that they are going to order a bottle of wine and then 2 martinis and then top it off with a Jameson. But they're hot and they're funny and they're successful and you want to have sex with them. But is that the right move is that somebody that I should be pursuing a relationship with? Probably not.
Yeah.
Right. And for so long, I was like, well, there's something wrong with me, right? This is my problem, not theirs. Although I'm sure I've dated my fair share of people who might be struggling.
Yeah.
But when they ask me the question, because they usually do, is it okay if I have a drink? My first response is always, of course, I'm okay with it, because I want to put their needs before mine. And that's what I did for years. And I got into really unhealthy, toxic relationships with people who were not great for me. Might be great people, but not great for me. And I know each person with, you know, who struggles with drinking or addiction has different boundaries with that. Some people might be totally fine with their partner having a drink on the first date or drinking casually on a Wednesday night with dinner. But I don't know any alcoholic that would not appreciate somebody not drinking with them. And I think, you know, with that, putting men's needs before mine because I had a problem and I was the sick one led me down a route of, okay, these are not the right people for me.
Yeah. Yeah, I can completely relate to that as well. And I actually brought that up on another episode, that in early sobriety, almost everyone I talked to or went out with or anything of the sort were most likely alcoholics.
Yes, that's what we attract. We attract that.
Yeah. And the other person was like, oh, I experienced something entirely different. So everyone copes with it in their own way, but that was just what I was used to.
Yes.
So it took me a while, even though I was sober, to realize, okay, having 6 drinks on a day is not normal. Like maybe I don't need to date a sober person. I've said that a million times, but having more than, I would even say 2 drinks on a date with someone who doesn't drink is excessive.
Yes.
Is extremely excessive. Like you're sitting there not drinking. They're having 6, 7 drinks. Oh, let's go to a bar afterwards. I would just go along with it because I just wanted exactly what you're saying. I just wanted that validation.
Yes.
So I didn't care. So in the back of my mind, I might have thought, okay, this is not ideal, but I never even thought this isn't going to work out long term. I would completely snow myself where I was like, yeah, this is great. This is awesome. Like this is definitely going to go somewhere as they're slamming back drinks and I'm sitting there dead sober. But that also led to the feeling of being super alone because you're not fully connecting with them either because they are drunk and you are not. So it just felt like I couldn't connect with people in my addictions. I couldn't connect with people after my addictions. Maybe I had the false sense of connection when I was drunk, but not during the daytime or anything like that. So for a while, years into being sober, I felt like I couldn't connect with people. And then that's when you really struggle because you're like, okay, now I'm sober and I still can't connect with anyone and I still feel super lonely. So that was definitely challenging for me.
Yeah. And I think, again, so I just celebrated my 2 years. I've been trying to get this right since I was 22. I'm 36 now. And I'm just starting to really form relationships with sober women and being able to have these conversations. And, you, me, Rachel, I think we were at brunch a couple weeks ago when we were talking about our dating stories. That is so incredibly helpful because at the end of the day, when I first started dating in sobriety over the years, and I was not okay with them getting drunk in front of me, I was like, well, there's something wrong with me. I need to fix this. I need to fix what my emotions and my feelings are. But my emotions and my feelings are valid, right? Just because that's okay for somebody else recovering from alcoholism doesn't mean that it's, that it's a boundary that's uncomfortable for me. And hearing that between, other women, again, it goes back to like being able to like recover out loud and find people who are like you and can have those conversations is so important to me because I walked out of that brunch being like, hell yeah, like I'm not alone in feeling this way.
Yeah. Yeah, no, it's definitely really hard. And it's something I've talked about with guys on the show too, is the sober dating, because I just think dating period is hard.
Dating sucks. Dating is hard. Dating is hard. And then you add that layer on top of it because the first thing that you do usually on a first date is you go to a bar. And I don't really frequent bars that much. I have no reason to. And that automatically is a first hard step. I definitely put on my dating profile like I am sober. Men don't usually read that, but it's there in case anybody cares. But yeah, so you have that conversation pretty quickly, and I usually tell them by the first date, if they don't read my profile, that I'm in recovery.
Yeah.
And that's been a deal breaker for some people, and to each their own. I don't know if it's a fear that I'm not going to allow them to have fun, or they can't have fun with me, or I'm not fun, or whatever that reason is. Again, to each their own. But I like to get that out of the way fairly quickly, just so I feel comfortable in settings with them.
Yeah. I used to feel super insecure telling people
Of
too.
course.
Super insecure. But now my mindset has shifted where it's so regular for me now that I don't think of it as an insecurity, because at the end of the day, it's a bonus that it's a whole nother thing you don't have to worry about with someone. A lot of relationships do end and someone did something they didn't want to do when they were drunk,
Right.
or there's just so many issues when you're drinking and they're drinking and there's fights, and there's just so much that goes into that I'm proud to say nowadays that I don't drink. But for a while it used to be something I used to be nervous about. Then when I crossed over to the phase that, okay, now I'm proud I don't drink. But then I would be like, okay, but I'm embarrassed to say that it's because I was a problematic drinker.
Right.
Not just, oh, I just decided to give up alcohol because I was enlightened.
Right.
But I just feel like getting through, I wish it was that, getting through all the steps with it is so difficult because you can only really get there by living through those experiences. Like,
yes,
most likely you're not just going to get sober and then be like, yes, I'm super proud to tell someone and it's going to be so fun.
It's enlightened, I wish. But no, because it's always, I think some people will feel awkward because then they don't know what to say next,
Mm-hmm.
right? And they feel like they need to say something, which isn't the fact, right? Just be like, cool, what can I get you to drink,
Mm-hmm.
right? Or what would you prefer?
Yeah.
You know, it's the people that sometimes will ask like, oh my God, like, well, tell me about it. And then again, very early on in the stages, nobody deserves to know my life story,
Mm-hmm.
right? Like that is my life. That's private until I deem you worthy of hearing my life story.
Yeah.
Right? Because when I was drinking or drugging, open book, right?
Yeah.
Like TMI across the board. But I think, you know, once I get comfortable with people and they understand, I mean, for me, addiction, and not to sound dramatic, but it's very much life or death, right? I mean, I've had some very close people in my life who are not here today die from addiction.
I'm so sorry.
Yeah, and it's, you know, and I think people are starting to understand, and I think, again, as the sober community grows, it's not a matter of like, okay, I'm just not drinking. It's like, okay, my sobriety is so sacred to me that I want to date and I want to open up my life to people. But now, so more than ever, I am super conscious of the people, things, places that I allow into my life.
Mm-hmm.
That I need to be like, is this something that is going to help me thrive? Or is this something that feels really good right now? And that could be a date. That could be anything. And I really have to think through that and
Mm-hmm.
say, okay, is this good for me? Is this healthy?
Yeah. Yeah, definitely. And where do you feel like you are at today with your journey, with really everything, with going on these dates and your eating disorder and recovery, all of that?
So I think one of the benefits to, dealing with addiction and mental health is, I've been in therapy for over 20 years, right? I've been an inpatient. I really feel like I've done and I continue to do the work, and I'm probably the healthiest and happiest that I've ever been. Not to say I don't have bad days. I have very bad days. But I think just looking back of all the relapses and all the struggles that I've had, I've really always gotten sober, or I've tried to get better for other people.
Mm-hmm.
And this last relapse that ended just over 2 years ago, I was drinking and drugging for a couple of years, and it was during COVID, and I was living in London.
Mm.
And my mom couldn't fly over. My family is amazing. They really, they don't enable, which I wish they did at times back in the day, but we're coming to help you. We're coming to save you. And this was the first time that it was like, you can't,
Mm-hmm.
and I don't want you to. Allow me to lose something. Allow me to really come out of this and hit that rock bottom, whatever that may be. And I remember the morning that I woke up and I had a cut on my head. I had gotten into a fight with a vacuum and a dresser.
Oh my God.
And I had a cut on my head and a bruised chin, and just, it was not a look. And I had therapy that morning, and she looked at me, and we just stared at each other, so what I thought was 30 minutes or so, and it probably was 5 seconds. And she just looked at me, and she's like, all right, what do you want to do? And I cried, But it was very much like, this is my life. This is my journey. And I'm going to get better because I deserve it.
Mm-hmm.
And that was the first time in my whole life that my mom wasn't dropping me off. My uncle wasn't sending a sober coach. People weren't coming to my rescue and dragging me to places. And I'm so grateful for that relapse, because today I value everything that I have. I'm so grateful. I really try to live a life of gratitude, because I feel like I've done it and I chose to do it.
Mm-hmm.
And I think, my therapist always says, like, if you're going to struggle well. And I always play that in my head, that I'm going to have those days where this is hard, and I might think of a drink, or I might think of, anything that I can use and abuse. And it doesn't have to look like perfection anymore. And I think I'm such a perfectionist that for years it had to be perfect.
Yeah.
And I can just struggle well now to whatever that looks like for me.
Yeah, absolutely. That's amazing too, that you finally made it this far. And I truly believe that for everyone, their journey is exactly how it's supposed to be.
Yes.
And I experienced something similar where I tried to get sober for other people, to make other people happy, and it didn't stick. And then when I did it for myself, it did. But you really, I have never found anyone that did it for other people and had it stick. So it really is that switch where you are doing it for yourself and you are actively trying to recover for you and only you. And obviously you want everyone in your life. You want your parents and your family members and your loved ones to experience the best you as well, but you just cannot get there unless you are willing to do it for yourself as well, I feel like.
I completely agree. But I was always so confused when people were like, you have to do it for yourself. I'm like, what does that mean? What does that feel like? Because I love my friends, I love my family, and I wanted to prove that I was a good daughter and I was a good friend. But at the end of the day, one of the things that always irritated me was when people who were older than I was would come up to me in AA or anywhere else being like, oh, you should be so grateful that you caught this early. And I literally wanted to scream at them, being like, it was identified that I was a problematic drinker, an alcoholic, or whatever you want to call it, before I even turned the age of 21, right? And I was like, I haven't lived. And that's what I considered living, was I haven't lived yet, because I haven't drank in every bar in New York City, or had an Aperol Spritz in Italy, or had a glass of champagne at my wedding. Those were all things that I was like, I'm never going to have those. I'm so angry. Why me? And now I'm like, yes, me. Like, I get to be present and enjoy these things and live authentically. And I think that was one of the main issues that I had, especially in my active addiction, is I told people, this is my authentic self. So leave me be. I was born this way. Right?
Yeah. I know exactly what you're talking about.
And people were like, you're going to die. And I had
You're like, no, I'm a party girl.
I'm a party girl, right? I mean, literally going back to high school, like, it was a badge of honor. I don't know if you remember or if you had the same experience, but to like walk into a party with like a 6-pack was cool. And then a 12-pack was even cooler. But by the time you got to an 18-pack of Natty Ice, at the Sump or the school parking lot, you look ridiculous.
Yeah.
And I'm like, if that's my authentic self, that is sad.
That's not it. Yeah. Yeah, I think that's a really bad mindset when people have, and I've seen other podcasts even recently where this guy was saying, well, that's just how I am, and I worked on it all through my 20s, and it didn't stick, so that's just how I am, so I'm gonna do me. And it's like, if it's something negative and something bad and a
Yes.
bad characteristic about yourself, you should probably keep working on it until it sticks.
100%.
Because it might take 10 years, it might take 20 years, but the remainder of your life getting to live it without whatever that addiction or bad habit or bad characteristic in yourself is, to me, it's definitely worth it. Even if you
100%.
get 20 years without it, that's better than, I think, throwing in the towel and just saying, oh, this is me, because we're all, as human beings, born with defects. And if you choose not to work on those defects, you're really not having the human experience. You're just getting by.
Right.
Just zombieing through life, I think.
Which sounds awful. Who wants to just get by?
Yeah.
That sounds awful to me now.
Yeah.
But I was, again, I could not imagine my life without alcohol. And it's so scary. And, you know, to re-find hobbies and reconnect with old friends. I mean, it's again, it sounds so cliche, but sobriety is such a gift. It really has been. There is not a aspect of my life that has not improved across the board. And, you know, I'm proud of the person that I am today, where, again, going back to active addiction and isolating, I just tried to hide so much of myself. Like, authentic who? Like, there was nothing authentic about anything that I was doing. So, yeah, I'm very, very, very happy now. And again, it's looking at it across the board, across mental illness and addiction. I love a boundary. I love a hard conversation. My relationships have improved with people, you know, when I set those boundaries and have those conversations. And, you know, then you take out the drugs, you take out the alcohol, and, you know, the gifts really, they just keep coming.
Yeah, absolutely. And I feel the same way about my own life, that I'm so grateful I'm here, and there are extremely hard days, but in the grand scheme of things, I wouldn't trade those hard days for anything to have the good days.
No, who wants to drink over it and then wake up the next day? Like, I can still close my eyes and think of every single hangover.
Yeah.
Right? Like, there was nothing worse than that. I love my mornings now. They're so sacred to me.
Yeah.
Like, I love waking up. But yeah, there's that feeling of just waking up with shame and guilt and, oh my God, what did I do? Oh my God. Don't miss that at all. Not at all.
Yeah. For a while, I wasn't even getting hangovers. I was also super young. Super young. But I felt like at that point, I wasn't getting consequences for my drinking. So I was just like, oh, I'm fine. Like, my friends would be like, oh, I've been throwing up since Tuesday. I'm like, I was fine like 5 minutes after I woke up.
You didn't drink enough, obviously.
Yeah. But then once the hangovers started coming, then you actually start to face some repercussions. And then obviously the anxiety and everything that comes with it. But today I'm all about, I obsessively say things like this to myself when I run, about, I'm all about finding things that you cannot buy, you cannot cheat your way to, you cannot manipulate your way to, that you have to truly earn.
Yes.
And you cannot get sobriety by buying it. You cannot cheat your way there. You can only get it by putting in the work. And I think that anything that is like sobriety is great. If you cannot buy it and you cannot cheat your way there, I want it today.
and it's the most rewarding thing. Like, I'm a huge hiker now. I found hiking in sobriety, and every hike is I get very emotional just thinking about my hiking trips, and it's very similar to how I view sobriety or how I view recovery. And, you know, I can't drive a car there. I cannot get a plane. I have to physically walk up mountains to get that view. of you that very few people will see, right? It is special, it is unique, but I put in the work. So every time I hit a summit, I'm like, I did that. I worked my way here. And I think the same thing when it comes back to sobriety is each day I'm like, I did this. I put in the work. I didn't pick up. I had those hard conversations. I was honest with myself and with others. I showed who I am authentically without trying to hide pieces of myself. And that's why I'm able to stay sober. It's putting in that work, which sounded horrific years ago, right? Again, overwhelming, exhausting, can't do it, don't want to do it. Work, don't want to do that. Yeah. Just give it to me. But it's so much better once you work for that.
Exactly. And I'm trying to get back into racing too so that I can get those feelings. And I just look back where before I was pretty materialistic, wanted things that you could buy or wanted the quick fix that you could kind of cheat your way there, and having that instant gratification, but you're never going to feel as good as putting in the work every single day, every step of a hike, every pedal of a cycle to get yourself to the other side. There's no other feeling.
No, and what a natural high, right? A good, healthy high that beats out everything else.
Yeah.
But yeah, I think that, again, as people continue or I continue to have more and more time under my belt, I'm so excited for that work. And I think, as people who have had these struggles, we were joking about being enlightened before, not to say I will ever be enlightened, but I think there is a sense of gratitude that we do get to connect and have these conversations with each other, whether that's other people in recovery or just other normies or people who don't suffer from that, that we come at it from a place of like, okay, how can I work with you? How can we collaborate? How can we, compromise and have those healthy boundaries? Again, and going back to dating, I'm like, these guys would be so lucky to date somebody who is healthy, right? As compared to like the sick person who was fun and a party girl.
Yeah.
But I mean, she wasn't fun at the end. That was not, nobody wanted to be around me.
Exactly. The end of the night was a totally different vision. And it's going back to social media, I've talked about several times. The picture you post at the beginning of the night is not the picture of how the night was ending. And oh, look how fun I am. Look at me at this party in this dress was not how that night was ending.
No, never did.
And I don't even have a lot of pictures. I always try to do my reels and the befores and afters. I don't even have that many pictures because I wasn't taking pictures of it.
I keep looking for photos and videos of myself. Again, the last 15 years, I've been a solo drinker and drugger. However, I did record myself almost every night crying into my phone saying, Jillian, watch this tomorrow to see how scary it is. And I would do voice notes, like dark stuff.
Wow.
And that's what I have because my apartment was my bar. It was my club. It was my restaurant. It was everything. Blinds down, bottles everywhere, like very much like a drug den, right? Just not a healthy place to be. But again, I'm like, oh, there's really we'll call it proof, right? Because I think that, and I'd love to hear your take on this. When I meet people always say, oh, I can't imagine you being an alcoholic, or I can't imagine you having an issue with drugs, which they mean as a compliment. But I take it in a way, and I remember going to my first crisis center, and I wore my American Eagle sweater and button down and khaki pants, and I straightened my hair, and I walk in, and the woman looks at me. I'm 22 years old, and she's like, you don't belong here. I'm like, I know. Tell these people that.
Which is the worst thing you could say.
100%.
Yeah.
And there is a moment every time somebody says that, being like, are you sure you have a problem? There's a quick, it doesn't happen as much anymore, but there is a quick, like, I might be able to get one over on you. I might, I never think, oh, I don't. I know deeply in my soul that I cannot drink or drug at all. However, I have that moment of, this could be a situation where I can get one over.
Yeah. Yeah. No, I've definitely experienced that at different jobs and meeting new people where they can't believe that because I got sober at 21. So
I love it.
Thank you. And yeah, they don't picture it, the 21-year-old blonde girl being the one that's sober, that was bad enough that they had to get sober. So it's definitely not fitting the mold. And that's why I think it's so important to talk about this, because you do then trick yourself. That's what I kept thinking, like, oh, well, maybe it'll be different. Maybe I just had to get my eating disorder under control. Maybe I just had to deal with getting over that one trauma, or getting over this or getting over that. And then you just keep making excuses. But at the end of the day, you are just like everyone else. And I do feel awake in the sense that through soul searching and just like my meditative exercising and all of that, I don't feel like human beings are different from one another in too many ways. Like all of our problems link back to one origin, and a lot of people had it a lot worse than others, but it doesn't, comparing trauma or trying to always have it a competition, well, they shouldn't feel like that because I had it this way, that is just so counterproductive. And at the end of the day, through the human experience, everybody struggles.
Yes.
So it doesn't matter what you look like on the outside. Everyone's going through their own stuff in different ways. And everyone can be an alcoholic, and everyone might need to go to a crisis center, and that there isn't a look to that. But unfortunately, throughout the years, and I think it's because people didn't have this knowledge, there is a stereotypical look for an alcoholic, and that is just so immensely false and misinformative, because I think I just made up that word.
It's a great word. You should.
I do that all the time in this too. But that everyone needs to realize that there isn't a look. And I've even had people say about me doing this podcast or me talking about sobriety in the past, like, what right does she have to talk about on recovery? Like, acting like my story wasn't bad enough, when really in reality they have no idea what actually transpired or took place. But it's just, again, stereotyping based on what somebody looks like.
And totally agree. I remember going to AA and walking in, nobody looked like me, which was a struggle. It was, and I prejudged 100%. But again, they were talking about like, oh, their husband left or their kids won't talk to them. And I'm like, I don't have those shared experiences.
Yeah.
But the amount of times I've used, well, I'm a girl from Long Island who went to and played soccer, so of course I'm going to drink a lot. Right? Where, again, another alcoholic will be like, well, I was on the chess club, so of course I drank a lot. Or I went to engineering school, of course we drank a lot. Or it was in a fraternity or sorority. I'm like, every group, whether in what you look like, all has the same kind of like tunnel vision. I'm unique because I did this and my background is this, which equates to me being a problem drinker. Yeah. Which, again, it's so across the board. I'm so thankful for Instagram. I really can't tell you, because each of us can go and find somebody who's got similar experiences, similar background, and identify with them in a way which, we can't do, necessarily in a forum of, AA. You could really go and shop for people who can I vibe with? Yeah. What does that look like? Yeah. and you and the rest of the community are so open and so lovely. Like, I hope you guys continue to do what you do, because you have no idea how many people you're helping. And I'm so grateful for all of you.
Thank you. I'm so grateful for you and being open about your experiences and all of that. And I think at the end of the day, that is the purpose of what we are trying to do here at Get Real, is to get the message out there for the people that need to hear it. And it's not for, I'm not saying every single person needs to stop drinking. Every single person needs to do exactly what we're talking about on this podcast. It's just for the people that feel like they could benefit from stop drinking, for just health reasons, for mental reasons, for mental clarity. The answers are here for people that actually have a problem and are problematic and experience alcoholism. You can come listen to other people that have also experienced those same things. And at the end of the day, that is the main mission, because you can feel super alone because you do have exactly what we were talking about, that voice in your head saying nobody's ever felt like this before, nobody can relate to you, these thoughts are so unique. And at the end of the day, they're not. A lot of people have had them before you, and you can learn from other people's experiences and maybe take out a painful step or two because you heard someone else give great advice on it.
100%. I mean, what we're all trying to do, I think, is just saying, like, this is what's helped me. This is how I feel now. And if you want a part of that, like, again, there's so many great examples of people who, who have sobriety, and they're more than happy to provide, again, just a little bit of their story and say, again, you don't need to do it this way. And I'm a full believer that there is no one right way to recover,
Yes.
Whether that's, 12-step, AA, I'm sure we could all use a therapist, to be honest. I would probably highly recommend that. But, there's no right way, but there are a lot of wrong ways to recover, right? And I think the biggest takeaway from me was the way I thought I would recover was just to stop drinking. And that just doesn't stick.
No.
You have so much more to work on, but each person can really build their own recovery with certain tools and aspects that bring them, the most joy and the most peace. So yeah, there's no one way. And I think I was told for so long that it was just AA, which I do like. But again, that puts us, or at least me, in a situation of, well, I'm unique, I'm not going to do it. And again, that kept me drinking for many years.
Yeah. And I think that whole, I'm just going to stop drinking and that's the fix. If you do struggle with multiple things, like both of us do, that is of no use to us, because you still have to eat at the end of the day.
Yep.
So how are you going to fix that? You still have to, at least for me, like I've talked about before, I backed off exercise a little. Now I'm back at it, and it's the best part of my life. I never would have been able to get a healthy relationship with exercise and endurance exercise, especially, if I did not fix what was going on internally. Yeah. So you cannot have the things that you're searching for if you do not heal internally. It's just, at least for me, when I just tried to stop drinking and thought that was going to fix things, it honestly made it worse before I figured out how to get it better.
Why stop drinking if you're still going to live a miserable life, right?
Exactly.
There's so much more that comes from not drinking, which, again, revisiting old passions and hobbies like endurance, like, oh my God, like, I'm so happy for you that you get to do that again. And from a safe, healthy, enjoyable place, that is such a gift.
Yeah.
That you can't do that if you just put down the bottle. There's other work that's involved. And again, just formulating a multifaceted person with multiple interests. And I think when people just put down drinking, at least this is my experience, then I was like, my identity was, I'm an alcoholic. And now today I am a hiker. I am a soccer player. I am a corporate professional. I am, I'm so many different things with so many different interests. And that only comes from recovering instead of just stopping drinking.
Mm-hmm. Definitely. And what would you say to somebody that has experienced relapse, that feels like they gave it a go or 2 or 3 and didn't feel like they get it? What would you tell them to do next?
Oh, relapse is so painful. And in my experience, telling people right away and telling people from a place of understanding that they're going to be hurt, not because they're mad at you, but because they love you and they care for you, is something that's super important. And choosing those people correctly, right? You're not going to go tell that friend who's kind of your frenemy, right? You're going to go to somebody who you know. And again, I come from a very privileged spot that my mother has always been that person for me. And through relapses, she continues to tell me, I will always be proud of you. I will always support you, no matter what happens. She has created that space that I can come to her, and I have when I've struggled. Mm-hmm. And I think going back to when we first started this conversation is those secrets will literally kill you. Mm-hmm. And the quicker that you come out with that, the quicker people will gather around you and love you. And that might not be the quick fix to getting back sober, but you're creating a chain reaction of, okay, I've now told these people I can stop lying about X, Y, Z. I can stop doing the other behaviors that go along with relapse that continue to make us sick.
Yeah.
And again, I just thinking like reaching out to people who are also in recovery, find somebody's recovery that you want, right? And talk to them about it. Because as much as my mom can give me advice and she can love me, she says this all the time, I'm never going to understand what you go through on a day-to-day basis. I will never understand how hard you fight. So she always says, go to your community, go to an AA meeting. Mm-hmm. So I think, telling people and letting that secret out, but also, again, finding people whose recovery you want is super important.
Definitely. That's super wise, and secrets make and keep you sick
100%.
At the end of the day, I think is a main takeaway from everything we've talked about. But thank you so much for coming on and telling your story.
I loved it. Thank you so much.
Of course. Thanks for tuning in and getting real with us. Podcast will be posted every other Wednesday on Spotify and YouTube. Please reach out via DM if you want to chat.